R is for the end of the world. There are mountains from my childhood that no longer exist. Ancient trails of the Cherokee now cut off by massive scars upon the earth. I will weep and wail for the mountains. Why has the land been ruined and laid waste like a desert that no one can cross? What began over a century ago as a promise of jobs and prosperity to the people of Appalachia never delivered, even to the coal barons. Miners were paid in scrip, not money, which forced them to live in substandard housing and use overpriced company stores. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers are crying out against you. This trapped the miners into a cycle of poverty, sickness, and death. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. You see, I owe my soul to the company store. The miners began to organize into unions, but the coal companies pushed back with deadly force. Coal companies hired Baldwin Felts detectives to violently evict pro-union miners from company housing. Miners resisted and organized a march to Logan County to organize miners there. When miners fiercely resisted the union-busting efforts, coal companies attacked them on the ground, even with machine gun nests, and dropped bombs on them from the air, including chemical weapons. The army was called in, but the miners would not fire on federal troops. Many were veterans themselves. And thus the more than 10,000 miners which had been winning beforehand simply laid down their arms and stopped fighting. Miners' leaders were arrested and tried. The miners were forced back into the mines where they would die in record numbers for over 40 years. Paid in scrip redeemable only by the company, they and their families were trapped indefinitely in a prison of sickness, poverty, and death. But even though the aerial bombardment also included the use of chemical weapons, there were no repercussions for the coal operators. Angry, outraged, don't be. It's not his way. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. The coal barons and racists of the 20s are gone, and those today driven by lies and greed soon will be. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. Their way is religion as a political tool to deflect blame for their own sins onto them. And it works at first, which is what the coal companies did in the 1920s. An infrequently used term for poor white farmers was transformed into the label of a them to be feared. See, they wore red bandanas around their necks as a sign of unity. So coal barons promoted themselves as victims of an unruly mob of godless rednecks that were a threat to their neighbors and to America. They set up organizations to educate and advocate for big coal, in large part by branding miners as backwards, dirty, and deserving of their fate. For example, the American Constitutional Association. And what was their legacy? The mine wars of the 1920s were banned from K-12 curricula, and to a large part still are today. By the mid-1920s, those rednecks were forced back into a cycle of poverty and death and forgotten. The people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and the needy and mistreat the foreigner, denying them justice. So I will pour out my wrath on them, declares the sovereign Lord. Meanwhile, the coal industry thrived and expanded. Not hardly. See, creating a fear of them to deflect blame away from us does not address the problems with us that led to the deflection onto them. If you fail to do this, you may be sure your sin will find you out. Build cities, but do what you've promised. Even as demand for coal skyrocketed, big coal struggled with all the same issues that had led to labor disputes and other problems. In the 1920s, the late 1920s, many newspaper articles and industry reports said surely the 1930s will be better than the disastrous 20s. Instead, the Great Depression all but destroyed the coal industry. Regardless, the coal wars of the 1920s set a precedent, to no one's advantage, of corporations deflecting blame to avoid accountability. And that is when the climate disaster began. Scientists were already observing and predicting local and global changes to air quality. Eunice Foote, 1856, John Tyndall, 3 years later. And then in 1896, we had a scientific article establishing the greenhouse effect. Popular mechanics wrote about it, as did many newspapers, that we were going to have a temperature increase due to the burning of coal. But local air pollution at that time was a more severe issue. But the demand for fossil fuels was growing, and the absence of corporate accountability was well established. Preventable deaths grew rapidly, alarming scientists worldwide. John Owens patented the first air pollution monitoring device in the 1920s. Coal burning and other big polluters made the atmosphere dirty and deadly. Smog killed 40 in Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948. The Great London Smog of 1952 killed more than 10,000 and sickened more than 100,000. The United States and much of the world was enveloped in an often deadly, never-ending haze. By the late 1960s, America's cities were blanketed in smog. Meanwhile, big coal was ripping apart God's beautiful mountains, and big industry ramped up its fouling of God's beautiful rivers. The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. By 1970, we created a crisis by polluting the air and poisoning the streams that called for Christians everywhere to work to correct the ravaging of the earth. By the late 1960s, Americans were no longer willing to choke to breathe as their children gasped for air. The answer? The 1970 Clean Air Act and the formation of the EPA. Life expectancy increased by more than 2 years immediately after establishing the EPA. And it's been responsible for a much improved quality of life. Nearly immediately, air and water quality issues were being addressed, and global issues were even being addressed. But also nearly immediately, big polluters began deflecting blame by demonizing the EPA and its supporters, and denying their own liability. In the 1970s and 80s, oil company scientists realized the extent of the destruction that they were causing, as did many others, including gender-altering plastics. We knew about that a long time ago and what they would do. It did not all go away on its own, which is what they said back then. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. You will reap what you sow. Instead of honesty and integrity, we and big oil, like big coal, big rail, big air, all that came before, chose a strategy of deflect and deny, blame others, and keep sinning. And now that game of deflect, deny, and blame again threatens us all. See, these are current, not historical. Thousands of mountains destroyed worldwide. Many shepherds will ruin my vineyard and will turn my pleasant field into a desolate wasteland. Parched and desolate before me, the whole land will be laid waste, because there is no one who cares, certainly not at the corporate level. Not holding big polluters accountable transforms their flaws into all of our future, causing exponentially more problems. Mercury pollution. The fun's gone. Fossil fuels took it, and we let them do it. Coal ash pollution, oil spills, ocean acidification, fracking, oil pipeline breaks, air pollution deaths. 1 in 8 deaths worldwide was due to air pollution in 2015. 1 in 5 in 2021. However, in the United States, it was only 3 per 1,000. Thank you, EPA. And many, many, many more, including the big one, climate change, especially global warming, the greenhouse effect, where global means local and localities distributed around the world. There are other global phenomena, tides and seasons. These are observable all over the world, but they look different in different localities. The tides look very different in one place as opposed to another, but they're completely predictable, even locally. Scientists predict the global average temperature will increase by 5 degrees by the end of the century. Predictions based on the amount of greenhouse gases we keep pushing out there. Global means increases in localities distributed around the world. More in some places, less in others. Faster in some places, slower in others. For example, Milan, Italy. Temperature since 1760. 10-year moving averages tell a story. Look at the end there. We can see it other places. Sydney, Australia. Here is the 10-year moving averages since 1950. 4.5 degree per century increase. Daily maximum temperatures in Death Valley. 10-year moving averages of about 1 degree per decade. 7.3 degrees per century. Now, if we simulate this, the Death Valley temperatures using stochastic weather simulation with no global warming, then we see no 10-year moving averages going up. In other words, it's not the method to blame here. It's us. Pocahontas, Arkansas. They had a record maximum on August 9th, 1934, of 112 degrees. But global warming. Minneapolis, St. Paul. They had the coldest winters in their history between 1970 and the mid-90s. And 2.82 degrees per century is how fast they're heating up. What about daily minimum temperatures? Coldest winters in history, and yet 6-degree increase per century in the minimum temperature. None of this is speculation. All the oil companies have long ago independently verified everything I just told you, and that the results will be catastrophic. Now, something to know about scientists is that they're overly cautious in choosing time periods for predictions. If they predict disaster by 2030, but the disaster doesn't occur till 2035, they're wrong. Scientists hate to be wrong. So end of the century is safe scientifically, but consequences by 2040 probably. Even next year, very likely. And the most obvious consequences are those that global warming is directly responsible for. All of which were anticipated by the fossil fuel industries in the 1970s. In 2022, multiple rivers dried up on every continent except Antarctica. It's not the same for all, but climate change impacts are independent of race, nationality, or household income. Every person on Earth is within a few miles of a locality predicted to soon experience frequent, severe, even deadly climate change events. For example, more intense wildfires will soon occur almost everywhere. Scientists predicted these climate impacts would be really noticed beginning about 2016. And right on cue, Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee suffered its first ever climate change wildfire in November of 2016. 14 killed, 14,000 evacuated, 2,400 buildings destroyed, 17,000 acres burned. The worst wildfire ever in Tennessee or southern Appalachia. It's just the beginning. Dozens, some models say hundreds of such fires are predicted for the same part of the country by the end of the century. See, climate forecasters are telling us there's going to be a global wildfire crisis, exacerbated by global warming, predicted flash droughts. I will punish you as your deeds deserve, declares the Lord. I will kindle a fire in your forest that consumes everything around you. The fire erupted overnight, spread at a rate of over 80 miles an hour. Everything was catching on fire. This is not a wildfire typical in Appalachia. It's more like those out west. But fires in the eastern U.S. may be the worst. For example, some fires in Canada. Here we see Tennessee burning in November of 2016. It's still burning, November of 2022. and there's much more fuel to burn than in western forests. Bigger storms, hotter summers, longer droughts, well, those are obvious. They, along with all the other money quest driven willful acts of destruction, will be what humanity is held accountable for by the Almighty. I brought you into a fertile land to eat its fruit and rich produce, but what did you do? You defiled my land, and you made my inheritance detestable. But in reality, the worst consequences are probably going to be the indirect ones. Those we expect and those we still haven't imagined yet. See, increasing average temperatures means you get increasing wet bulb temperatures. Wet bulb temperature is a measure of evaporation potential. Typically, it's many degrees below actual temperature, even on humid days, and it's never been high enough to have any real impact. But here's what we're looking at. Wet bulb temperatures above 90 degrees will cause human bodies to be unable to dissipate heat. Above 95 degrees, death in a few hours, and air conditioning fails. Something we don't talk about. Air conditioning was not going to last regardless of the temperature change. Much of the southern United States is predicted to be uninhabitable by the end of the century. The air conditioning won't even work on some days. Terrified? Don't be. It's only the Lord you should fear. The Lord Almighty is the one you regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. And his first response to our fear of him is comfort. I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. Fear and anger are our way, but they are not his way, because his way is wisdom. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the spirit of wisdom and of understanding, counsel and might, the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. To God belong wisdom and power, counsel and understanding are his. I keep asking the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, will give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. Given the evidence for climate change and at least some initial evidence of the consequences, we need to make wise decisions. Is it wise to simply leave it to the Lord when the Bible says he will be extremely angry at what we did to his creation and he'll let it burn? See, the Lord's going to lay waste to the earth and devastate it. The earth is defiled by its people, and its people must bear their guilt. Therefore, the earth's inhabitants will be burned up, and very few are left. Sounds like where we're headed. The day of the Lord is near. Fire has devoured the pastures in the wilderness. Flames have burned up all the trees of the field. The streams of water have dried up, and the fire has devoured the pastures in the wilderness. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and everything in the earth will be burned up. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and the sun was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were seared by the intense heat, and they cursed the name of God, who had control over these plagues, but they refused to repent and glorify him. That sure sounds like global warming to me. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up. A third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Maybe we should take this literally, dear fundamentalist. Is it wise to trust the fossil fuel industry that has overtly destroyed God's creation and covertly denied the truth and deflected blame? See, they knew what was coming. 40 years ago, they knew what was coming. And their goal was to deflect the blame onto us. See, it's our fault the oil companies are killing us. If there's just 90 companies that we held accountable, we may be able to deal with this issue. Is it wise to let scientists and engineers turn planet Earth into a giant uncontrolled experiment in carbon capture and climate manipulation? Billions of dollars have already been spent, and it's always been a failure. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. For example, the automakers who are quietly transitioning to emission-free vehicles and green energy, even though it is not the money quest way. The move to electric motors is a natural engineering progression. Electric motors do not need radiators because they're much more efficient than internal combustion engines, which is why locomotives and cruise ships are diesel electric motor powered by electric from diesel generators. But we don't have to generate with diesel. We could do something else and have already begun doing so very successfully. And it is wise to hold corporations accountable for their actions. See, accountability is not punishment. It's everyone playing by the same rules. It's what allows college and professional sports to be so inspiring. Aren't we told that corporations are people too? Well, they should act like it. At present, nobody trashes their communities in our world as much as corporations do. In the realm of trashy people, they're the trashiest. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning light, they carry it out because they can do it. Get up, go away. This is not your resting place. It's defiled, it's ruined beyond all remedy. The key is accountability, that we are a nation of laws and not of men, all treated equal. Demonizing individual companies only leads to more demons. When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it comes back with 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. But corporate accountability clashes with our profit-driven goals. Indeed, our decisions tend to be based on envy, ambition, arrogance, and misinformation, such as the GOP's reliance on conspiracy theories. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. Beware the MAGA experts in greed who use conspiracies and fear to intimidate you into silence or manipulate you into blaming some them. But wisdom from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Avoid the scoffers, the evangelical fatalists, or the economy-first realists who rely on fear and arrogance rather than on wisdom. Wisdom also means resisting fear, conflicts, arrogance, and guilt. That is, let neither the right-wing ideologue or the ecologically arrogant make decisions for you. If we are guilted to fear for after being canceled or labeled, it's not going to last much longer than the guilt emotion itself. There may be as few as 90 companies that need to be held accountable, but those are the companies spending billions to deflect the blame onto them, which in this case is us. Did you know you're responsible for the oil company sins? If silence are stopped by economic arguments, then we will all learn together that market-based capitalism is not always the answer. Well, you who live in the market district, all your merchants will be wiped out. You who think, the Lord will do nothing, either good or bad, while I'm making my money. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. God never intended for us to put economics or business ahead of our stewardship of His creation, and He judged Israel because they did. His law places a huge emphasis on Sabbath years that allow His creation to flourish, during which humanity does not consume it. I will scatter you among the nations, and your city will lie in ruins. All the time that it is desolate, the land will have the rest you did not give it during the Sabbath years you lived in it. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant. Then, finally, the land enjoyed its Sabbath rests until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Yet after scientists called for an 8-week shutdown at the onset of COVID, we barely agreed to 6 and then opened early so as not to damage our precious economy. Saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we can market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. The Lord has sworn by Himself, the pride of Jacob, I will never forget anything they have done. See, these are not coming back, nor will God restore any of the earth that we have destroyed. So we need to make wise decisions now, using wisdom that begins with a fear of God and a respect for His creation. Love those tree huggers. They're on the right path. When He established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when He made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then He looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And He said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil, that is understanding. But evangelicals and the MAGA GOP, they do not fear God, nor do the wealthy or their corrupt Supreme Court. Theirs is an easy believism, hypocrisy American style that preaches that God never holds a conservative accountable for anything. The Lord says these people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me, their quote conservative Christianity, it's just human rules they made up. It is these that are often the mockers, whose self-serving gospel excuses their actions and whose conspiracies prevent wisdom in stewarding God's creation. And yet, deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom can be accomplished and even agreed upon, even among scoffers and fools. Wisdom reposes in the heart of the discerning, and even among fools she lets herself be known. So the conclusion is this. We need to make wise decisions now, despite the scoffers and others who do not use wisdom to guide their actions. Because His way is wisdom, not just for us, but also for Himself. God made the earth by His power, but He founded the world by His wisdom, and He stretched out the heavens by His understanding. Scientists know better than the rest of us. Many do not fear God, but their life's work is the same as God's is, wisdom and understanding. So we should listen to them and then make wise decisions that lead to deeds done with humility, as we have done in the past. Because climate change is not the world's first global challenge. We made wise decisions in defiance of the scoffers, for example, in 1995. Nor will this be the last. But someday, there will be a last global challenge. One in which we act foolishly because of greed, don't want to hurt our economy, or corruption, blind loyalty to a man or some ideology. Perhaps it will be our partisan and corrupt Supreme Court who, to protect the wealth of its benefactors, frustrates our wise decisions. Perhaps it will be our anti-neighbor ideological extremism that leads to conflicts that distract from what is best for us and those to come. When that day comes, the Lord will judge the world. The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse consumes the earth. Its people must bear their guilt. And we are that curse upon the earth. To Adam he said, "Cursed is the ground because of you. The earth will become desolate because of its inhabitants." It was not the mountains who sinned and caused their own destruction. But His judgment need not happen today, tomorrow, or even soon. We can still choose His way, the way of wisdom. And if we do so, it'll be sufficient for climate change, as it has been in the past and could be again in all the challenges we face in our future.